Kale tusaasirire ddala tubadde tufunye attack oba cyber attack ebadde nzibu ennyo naye Mukama atusobozesezza okudda ku mpewo era njagala wano wennyini Professor ngabo obadde otambula we batujjidde ku mpewo obadde omaze okutuwa background y'omutabani ne mwami Kulaije era nga otunyonnyola obukulu bwa programu eno ey'olwaleero awo wennyini wenjagala otandikire tugende maaso.
Kakati bwe nasabibwa okuweereza ekifaananyi eri UNN ekyeyambisiddwa okubategeeza nti nja kuba ku puroguraamu ya leero, nabaweereza ekifaananyi ekyankubibwa ku nkomerero ya September 1983 just before I delivered my first lecture as a teacher of law at Makerere University Law School, the end of 1983. By sending that picture, I did the contrary of what I had just told my son, that he should send the newspapers a picture that shows that he's older. Because my son has been writing letters in the newspapers, which end up being the letters of the day since he was in senior 5. And therefore, the newspapers continue to use his picture as you see it, a very young man. But I sent that picture because of its significance of mine. It was because today is another extremely important day in my life, in that I'm addressing you, addressing Ugandans, not a class at the Faculty of Law at Makerere. Today's presentation is extremely important because our way out of the problems we are in is to make people more informed, more knowledgeable, and therefore wiser, so that we together can make decisions as Ugandans that can help us end the turmoil, political turmoil we have been in since 1966. And the second I said, well, they are going to see me, so it's okay to send you that picture, but it is important because it's a picture that was taken when I returned to Uganda with the purpose of teaching law and also a purpose of averting genocide in Uganda. So I ask that we see our independence video before I continue.
Kale program etandise, njagala obeere nga weteekateeka weetegereze nga tuleeta vidiyo eno. Tukyatawaanyizibwa ge mazima, naye tujja kufuba okulaba nga programu eno tugimaliriza mu busobozi bwaffe. Mukama bwana atusobozesa. Katulabe vidiyo eno Professor ate adde atunyonyole. Oli ku UNN The Truth Command Center.
Just before midnight, the 4th Battalion of the King's African Rifles, a battalion with 67 years of distinguished service, becomes the 1st Battalion of the Uganda Rifles, or in other words, the new Uganda's army, which will be employed on internal security and the protection of our borders. It is a few seconds to midnight, and the crowd is tense. 68 years of British rule are ending. As the national anthem is played for the last time under British rule, the Union Jack is formally lowered. A roll of drums heralds the Uganda national anthem, and our flag is raised. Uganda is independent. His Royal Highness reads an address which contains a personal message from the Queen.
It is now my solemn duty and privilege to hand to you, Mr. Prime Minister, as the representative of the peoples of Uganda, the constitutional instruments embodying the independence of Uganda. May God bless you all.
The Duke hands to the Prime Minister the constitutional instruments.
Today, we are met here not only to celebrate an end, but also to mark a beginning.
The Kabaka and the Prime Minister wait side by side to receive the guests. Here are the Governor and Lady Coos arriving. The ceremony starts. The Registrar of the High Court reads the commission under the Royal Sign Manual and Signet, appointing the Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief in Uganda. Sir Walter Coos, now Governor-General, subscribes the oath of allegiance. The Prime Minister takes and subscribes the oath.
Do swear that I'll be faithful and bear true allegiance to Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, her heirs and successors according to law, and that I will support and uphold the Constitution of Uganda as by law established. So help me God.
The crowd follows all this attentively. For us, it is the confirmation of independence.
Wow. Bwolaba video bweti ebirowoozo tebirema kuddayo. Professor.
Kaakati bannayuganda bannange, ebizibu bya Uganda tebyatandika na regime eriko oba regime eya Idi Amin. Twafuna independence. Obota akugambye the end and the beginning, but the end of what? And the beginning of what? Bwe njogera ku ignorance, ffenna tuli ignorant about our country. Tubadde ng'enkusu okuva lwe twefuga. Bwe nali mu America, waliwo famire eyalina enkusu abansabanga ngende to have some dinner with them. And enkusu eyo yali esobola okwogera ebintu by'abantu bye boogera okugeza enkusu senga maama maka aba ayita nnyo Pawulo ndeetera kino, Pawulo kino wakikoze. Kaakati maama oyo buli lwayita Pawulo amuddamu wangi maama, wangi maama. And it reaches a point nti maama bw'ayita Pawulo enkusu neddamu, tosobola kumanya nti enkusu yezzeemu. Kubeddiramu ddala nga Pawulo bw'addamu wangi maama. Naye njagala nkubuuze nti Pawulo bw'agamba nti wangi maama, the depths of that feeling nti maama yampise, maama oyagala nkole ki, all that is totally absent when the enkusu says wangi maama. So it's an empty phrase. Tubadde ng'enkusu nti omuntu akugamba nti you are independent, naye bw'otuuka okulayira you swear allegiance to the Queen of England. Are you independent? And for how long have we been celebrating independence of October 9th, 1962? Are we using our brains? Can you overlook the problems that came with our independence? Kaakati njagala mbategeeze. Independence eyo gy'olabye yatuyambako buyambi kendeeza njegere za mu Ngereza ze yali atusibye. Yatuyambako buyambi kendeeza njegere za mu Ngereza ze yali atusibidde emyaka egyo gyonna okuva lwe baasuula Kabaka Mwanga. Twekube emitima kubanga ebizibu bya Uganda tebijja kubeera sorted out when we continue to be ignorant. Democracy. A whole professor, a whole minister talks about deepening democracy in Uganda in 2025. Bwe nali omuvubuka kutandika mu mwaka gwa 59 okutuuka ku 63 nasima ekidiba ky'ebyennyanja e Mawokota ewa taata wange ku faamu. Bw'oba omaze okusima ekidiba ky'ebyennyanja osobola okwogera ng'omuntu alimu amagezi nti ekidiba kino ŋŋenda kigaziya kuba ekidiba oliko ky'osimye. Naye omuntu atalina kidiba kya byannyanja ogenda otegeeza abantu here and there ky'ogenda gaziya kidiba kya bwannyanja. Are you okay if you do that? You start your independence by swearing allegiance to the Queen of England. And above all, you take an oath before the governor who represents the Queen of England in Uganda. What did we get? October 9th, 1962. What we got, mwaganya kutandika process of self-determination, mwaganya okuba nti bannayuganda tuwuliziganya. Uganda gye twagala efaanana etya? Atukulembera abe na buyinza ki? olabye amagye agamaachinga awo, it's a colonial army. What kind of an army do we need in Uganda? Are we going to have an army that pays its entire allegiance to the Prime Minister of Uganda? Because the army is so marching, was trained and skilled and indoctrinated, that it's there to protect the colonial government. It was not there to protect Ugandans. It was there to protect the colonial government. Its allegiance was not Uganda. Its allegiance was in that human being who was here on behalf of the colonial power, and whatever he asked them to do, he did. You remember what they did to our brothers in Kenya, the Mau Mau? Did Idi Amin of Uganda, under that colonial army, go to fight for the rights of the Kenyans? He went to Kenya to oppress the Kenyans, his own brothers and sisters, because he was a member of a military that was designed to oppress, enslave, and that's what he did in the Mau Mau War. We started what we call our independence with huge problems. My fellow Ugandans, the first problem, we have the Queen as the head of state. On October 9th, 1962, the Queen remains the head of state. Njagala mbajjukize wano, twafuna problem when the Pope came to Uganda in 1969. The Pope came to Uganda because of the efforts of the late Cardinal Subuga. When the Pope agreed to come to Uganda, we entered into a very, very unfortunate situation where all Ugandans looked like fools. Because Obote came in, he was the executive prime minister. You saw him take the oath of office. And Obote said, I'm the head of state. And the Vatican is a state. Therefore, it was Obote to receive the cardinal. But the cardinal was not visiting Uganda as a state. The cardinal was visiting the Catholic Church in Uganda. Netusika omuguwa. Pope agenda wa karidinaali, agenda kusula Lubaga. Pope ajjawo Obote. Uganda government is not kumutegekera. We could not sort that problem out between ourselves. So the Pope kindly acknowledged our ignorance by simply saying that he's going to stay at Nsambya, where, of course, the Pope, the Vatican State, has an embassy. Since our independence, we have not been able to sort out anything on our own. Kuba we have phrases we use every day. Naye nga tulinga nkusu. The problems were very many, and I'm not going to deal with all of them tonight. But I would like to give you 2 examples of the problems we had that we somehow succeeded to sort out. The Queen was removed as head of state the day Sir Edward Mutesa became the president of Uganda and became the head of state. Sir Edward Mutesa was sworn in on October 9th, 1963, after Parliament passing a law as to who can become president of Uganda and how. But when you look at the swearing in of Kabaka Mutesa and the Executive Prime Minister Milton Obote, neither Milton Obote nor Mutesa had a consensus on what it meant to be head of state and what to be executive prime minister. I've read all there is to read about the conduct of Obote and Mutesa. They thought they were in Britain. The Kabaka of Uganda was the Queen of Uganda as president. And Milton Obote was the Prime Minister of Uganda in Britain, in order to have a Bishop of Canterbury, the Prime Minister of Britain, and the Queen must agree. Because in Britain, church and the state are one since the starting of the Anglican Church. But here we were repeating, we have the democratic system they have in Britain, where nkusu, pure and simple. And therefore, disaster was destined to happen. Political disaster was destined to happen. Now, at independence, there was no consensus except on three things. We were very happy. I was born 1947. I was old enough to see what was going on, and I was politically active. And I was happy. And all the people in Uganda were happy. Not because of anything, but two things. They could see the Kabaka of Uganda at Kololo, and the Baganda loved their Kabaka. And if the Kabaka said, we are getting our independence from Britain, we all clapped and celebrated. But what were we celebrating? We didn't know. The Banyoro did the same. They could see themselves at Kororo because the Kabaka of Bunyoro was at Kororo. The Basoga, the same. The Banyonkore, the same. The Batoro, the same. The Uganda we had at Kororo was not our Uganda. We had to create, we had to build a Uganda for Ugandans after reducing the chains of colonial rule on our people. The conflicts were bound to happen. And one thing that shows how serious the conflicts were, one has to go, and thanks to God, I've been able to access that information. The negotiations between UPC and the Kabaka Yeka. Those negotiations, Obote had his people. Buganda has had the Katikiro, who was the chairman of Kabaka Yeka, because the Kabaka of Buganda chose him to be the chairman of Kabaka Yeka. And they started negotiating the relationship. The union came about. For what reasons? The starting of the union was to make sure that Benedicto Kiwanuka is denied the opportunity of receiving the instruments of power from the British government. And if you read the books, the Archbishop of Canterbury was open about it. There is no way Britain is going to hand over power in Uganda to a Catholic. That was the interest of Britain. The most important interest of Britain was that they cannot hand over power to a Catholic. The second interest of the British people was that they cannot hand over power to a Muganda because Baganda are businessmen, and that if a Muganda gets power in Uganda, Britain would find itself having problems of having the monopoly over tea, coffee, tobacco being grown in Uganda. They said Baganda basuubuzi bajja kugenda batandika okutunda caayi e Japaani, bajja kutandika okukola enkolagana ne US batunde emmwanyi, bajja okukolagana n'ensi endala zonna batunde tobacco, bajja kukolagana n'ensi endala zonna batunde copper. So it was not in the interest of Britain to hand over power to a Muganda. So Benedicto Kiwanuka became a political victim because he was a Catholic and because he was a Muganda. That's how we started this country of ours, Uganda. Not on the basis of our common interests as Ugandans, but on the basis of interests of those people that were actually our enemies. Because the prosperity of Britain depended on what we produce. They had repressed slavery, buying people and taking them to Jamaica and other places to grow cotton and so forth. They had succeeded in taking our land and forcing us to grow cotton, coffee, etc., because you either grew coffee and cotton to feed the British industries, or you are denied the right to grow food for yourself. You read the books and you find in Uganda we call coffee kiboko. Omuzungu yatujjako ettaka n'aligabanyiza mu bantu abaali bakolera Omungereza. Eddala Omungereza n'alyefuga. Mu Kenya kye baakola era kye kyavaamu Mau, naye mu Buganda we were saved. The people were obedient eri kabaka waabwe, ne basobola on their own to grow the coffee and the cotton and whatever tea without the necessity of using force, excessive force. But in order the kabaka to get the compliance, his government whipped people that were not planting coffee trees to serve the colonial interests. So here we are. We are independent, but we are not independent. We have not defined our common interests, and therefore we have no consensus as to what is good for all the people of Uganda. We started in a vacuum. Incidentally, we continue to be in that vacuum today because the process of self-determination started. But in 1966, the crisis totally derailed the process of state formation and the national formation of Uganda. Now, just little bits here and there, I have been able to have the secret minutes of the negotiations that went on between Obote's people and the Kintu, which actually means the Kabaka of Uganda, with respect to the alliance of UPC. And it's total upside there. Literally, the only sane person that was involved in those negotiations was the late Paulo Muwanga. And recently I was talking to my children that it looks to me that the most important statesman that has ever existed in Uganda was Paulo Muwanga. Let me give you, for example. The Baganda came in with the Kabaka, who had all the support of the Baganda, extremely powerful, who had a very strong economic base if you talked about wealth in Uganda, who had the best educated people in Uganda. And that Kabaka's position, which was the position of Buganda, was that actually Obote can rule the other parts of Uganda outside of Buganda, but Buganda had to remain under the control of the Kabaka of Buganda and the Buganda government. This went to the extreme because in those negotiations, Obote knew he could never have been Prime Minister of Uganda without the 21 members of Parliament from Buganda. So he was extremely vulnerable. The Meng establishment felt so powerful, and rightly so. They treated Obote's government as a partner in the management of Uganda, and the Obote's role was to manage everything else outside of Uganda, but all matters in Uganda to be managed by the Mengo government. Let me give you a simple example. Because you saw the Queen was the head of state. The first ambassador that Uganda got was actually appointed by the governor of Uganda after October 9th, 1962, because the Queen was the head of state. Now they started this negotiation. Of course, there was a negotiation how many ministers would come from Kabaka Ika members of parliament, and the rest can go to the people outside of Uganda. That negotiation was made, and Obote's first cabinet shows what Buganda got. Buganda got the Minister of Education, which was extremely important, Dr. Luyimba Zake. Buganda got the Minister of Health, which was Dr. Lumu. Buganda got the Minister of Finance. And at our independence, the whole of Uganda was united under the theme that our enemy, poverty, and the poverty was under the Minister of Finance. Disease, our enemy disease, was under the Minister of Health, Dr. Lumu, and the ignorance was to be dealt with by Dr. Luyimba Zake, a Muganda appointed by the Kabaka of Buganda. So you can see the conflicts. Buganda was in full control of those things that mattered most to every Ugandan. The war against ignorance, the war against disease, the war against poverty. That's how we started our independence. Now, when it came to ambassadors, then the Kabaka and Obote started engaging the governor that they should have a role to play in the appointment of ambassadors of Uganda. The governor offered that he's going to consult. Then the fight began between Obote's group and the Kabaka's group. The Kabaka's group felt that they should appoint 50% of the ambassadors of Uganda, not because of anything other than that they had the political control over Uganda, on which Obote depended to remain in power. And that war went on. And all the discussion that I'm talking about, the only person that was making real sense in the interest of all Ugandans was Paulo Muwanga. But Paulo Muwanga was part of the Obote's team that was coming to negotiate as UPC. So he was the only nationalist. He was the only statesman. The others were fighting to get in and keep out. Keep Obote out of Uganda. And you remember the controversy about opening branches of UPC in Uganda. The Baganda said, don't dare open any branches in Uganda because Uganda is none of your business. We do it in Uganda, you do it in Acholi and Western Nile and Karamoja, then we come together and as equal partners decide what to do as a Ugandan government. So you can see how serious the problems were. Now, when the Kabaka became president, you had a very serious problem of the lost counties, Buyaga and Bugangaizi. And to me, it's so sad. Why didn't people listen to Paulo Muwanga? You remember, not too many years ago, we had a very sad situation here in Uganda regarding the question of whether Kampala is in Uganda. And people took positions that Kampala is not in Uganda, which was totally absurd and stupid. Because I can say that Uganda is in Africa, and that does not mean that Uganda is ruled by Africa. So if it's so important for somebody to say that Kampala is in Uganda, and rightly so, because tosobola kulowooza ku masiro ga Buganda nti tegali mu Buganda. And it was totally unreasonable for anybody, especially people in government, to make it so important that yes, you can say Mpigi in Buganda, but you cannot say Kampala in Buganda, when it was all clear that you can say Kampala is in Buganda, but the establishment in Mengo does not administer Kampala, like we can say we are in Africa, but the continent, the OAU or other organs don't manage the affairs in Uganda. How can you fail to separate the two? Kubanga the actors were nothing more than inkusu. Biases, throwing out phrases that meant nothing to them. Now, the issue of Buyaga and Bugangaizi, the Banyoro have historical reasons that they could not tolerate Buyaga and Bugangaizi to be defined, to be out of Bunyoro. But that's what exactly the Brits did when they defined the boundaries of Uganda in 1900. They defined Buganda with 20 counties, including Buyaga and Bugangaizi. So they created a serious problem because the Banyoro and the Baganda, because you are taking away counties of real significance in their history, and they say they are not in Bunyoro. Of course, that issue was not resolved before October 9th. It was resolved after our independence. And you can see the problems around that resolution of that lost county of Buyaga and Bugangaizi. Now, what happened? Because the Banyoro insisted that they should have their counties, like we insist to have to have our Masiro in Uganda, and to avert war or bloody conflicts. Ugandans agreed that the people living in those two counties should vote self-determination and they choose where they want to go. So they were given three choices. By the way, on October 8th, 1962, Buyaga and Bugangaizi were removed from Buganda. But they were not returned to Bunyoro. So they remained like you have districts today, that is a district under the central government, until the people in Buyaga and Bugangaizi voted. And they were supposed to vote out three options: whether they wanted to become part of Bunyoro, or they wanted to come back to Buganda because Buganda had lost them before October 9th, or that they should become an independent district like Karamoja, not subject to Bunyoro or Buganda. And the people in Buyaga and Bugangaizi voted, and rightly so, because it's part of their identity that they go back to Bunyoro, because the British colonial rulers took them away from Bunyoro and put them in Uganda. Those were extremely serious issues. By the way, I'm trying to bring you to a point so that you can appreciate the crisis of 1966. Tetusaana kuba nkusu nti bw'oyogera ku crisis ya 1966, you just take sides. Whatever Bote said is what you repeat a million times. Whatever Kabaka Mutesa said, you repeat a million times. That does not sort out our problems. We need brain power to sort out those problems. With respect to the lost counties, can you imagine the Kabaka was then the president of Uganda? Could he actually sign that Buyaga and Bugangazi is going back to Bunyoro? The Baganda would have eaten him alive. So the prime minister signs, and then Obote is hated intensely in Uganda. Now I want to bring to you, and this is not just history, because even today it applies. Idi Amin, when he took power, he said that once a government loses majority support with the army people, overthrow that government. The army does not want to fight with people, but the army people also want to have the privileges and the powers that go with being president. So the army is always interested, as individuals within the army, they are interested to have all the pleasures and the power and the money and the prestige that goes with one being president of Uganda. So once you lose the majority popular support, and the army knows they don't have to fight you in order to remove the president, they simply move in and remove the president. And you know what happens. You know the jubilation that took place in Uganda when Idi Amin grabbed power. They were not celebrating because Amin was going to do X or Y. They were simply celebrating because Idi Amin had succeeded to crush the head of their enemy. So, all these conflicts built up to the situation that took us to the crisis of 1966. Obote, because of the nature of the colonial army, incidentally, Honorable Mao recently said that the British did not encourage us to grow cotton or coffee because they wanted us to be a source of soldiers. And they called them marshal, and they found pride in being called marshal. So they joined police because they were marshal, they joined the army, etc., etc. But in the process, they created an army of poor people from poor communities because the salaries were almost nothing, and their job was to oppress the people of Baganda, of any tribe in Uganda, in order that the British people can get what they wanted. So, my fellow Ugandans, I'm going to conclude, but before I do so, I'm asking that you see a little video of a friend of mine who is an American black person.
Wow, I got me bwekatyo bweka tutusiza kufundikira n'ebigambo bya Professor ebibadde birungi bwe bityo. Ddala oyinza kusanga wa lecture efaanaganako bwetyo.
Kaakati
Professor agenda
kumaliriza
kuwa conclusion ya leero, naye njagala naawe asobola okukwata essimu yo ku ddakiika eno oyite ku simu yaffe eya studio agimanyi obeere nga otukubirako, weereza voice note yo oba oweereze message oba okube naye nga oyita ku WhatsApp yokka. So Professor nsaba ogende maaso.
Bannayuganda bannange, akayimba ka Davis Junior buli kigambo akakirimu ka makulu nnyo gye ndi era ka makulu nnyo eri every normal human being. Tosobola kugamba nti oyagala extended family naye nga you don't like your immediate family. Tekisoboka kugamba nti I love my wife but I hate myself, because the love for your wife starts with yourself. Charity begins at home. And in fact, you love your wife because you want to own her entirely. You cannot tolerate anybody else touching that young or old lady that is your wife. I conclude by asking you to acknowledge that by our very nature as human beings, don't talk this nonsense about patriotism and at the same time preach against ethnicity. For me, Buganda is my immediate family. And I'm proud to say that I'm a Muganda. A Muchiga should feel the same. Omunankole should feel the same. A Karamujongo should feel the same. I take Uganda to be my extended family in order to genuinely love Uganda, I must, by my very nature, love that I'm a Muganda. So, it's very unfortunate that political demands are made on you that are actually evil, because you are telling me to hate myself so that I can love my wife. You are out to destroy my marriage. Because what I feel that I love myself, and I want that wife of mine to be mine and mine alone, is what comes from the wife. The wife loves herself, and because she loves herself, she is selfish to say that this man that is my husband, I don't want anybody to touch her. So those people who preach against ethnicity in Uganda are enemies of the people of Uganda. They are your enemies. Let's all acknowledge that you cannot be right for anybody else nga tosobola kubeera right for yourself. I finish my calling on you. A Musoga should love the fact that he's a Musoga and proudly say he's from Busoga. The same applies to Baganda. If somebody wants to say that he's from the central region, it's okay, because the central region has a lot of people that are not Baganda. But for a Muganda to say that you are from the central region, I don't understand you. For me, I'm from Buganda, and thank you very much for listening tonight. And I'm going to listen very carefully to your responses, because as a Muganda, ndi mugezi nga mubuulire. I hope that my communication to you today helps in the regard of okuba nti ndiko kye mbabuulidde, and at the same time njagala mumbuulire nsobole okubeera omugezi okusinga wentuuse. Mwebale nnyo, mwebalire ddala.
Wow. What a lecture. Kansubire nti buli omu watudde abadde abukaddewo era ebisomeseddwa byonna bimuyingidde mu mutwe. Katandika butandisi. Eno ye episode esoose, ate era abakenkufu bangi bakyajja balinga professor ono, kubanga twetaaga kati okubeera with upright mind. Naddala omwaka guno gwe tuyingidde ekitta bantu mu Uganda ekyatuumibwa presidential election mwe kigenda okulonchingibwa. So buli munnayuganda alina okubeera nga ali mentally alert. So mwekuumire ku UNN, mugambe bannammwe abatasobodde kubaawo leero, ate olwokubiri olujja babeerewo. Era n'emisomo gyaffe egya bulijjo nagyo bagyettanire, kubanga kakati twetaaga mumanye nti embeera mwe tuli ffe tugyesibyemu. Mbadde mpuliriza ebigambo bya Professor kyensinze okuwulira era kyembadde nzija mbasomesaako wano olunye, nti ebizibu bya Uganda tebitandikidde ku Museveni. Nedda, Museveni yakozesa mukisa ogwo ng'era omukujjukujju bw'aba olw'ezo ensobi ye ze yalaba nga zikolebwa ne zimuwa omwagaanya. N'olw'ensonga eyo tusobola okutereeza ensobi zino. singa tuba tuwuliriza bulungi ebigenda okutusomesebwa wano oba n'ebize bitusomesebwa n'ebikyatusomesebwa ku UNN. Ekitabo kino kitabo kya wandiikibwa Professor Peter Musoke Gukiina gw'obadde owulirako awo, era ng'ekitabo kino kyatuumibwa Uganda, a case study in African political development. Kiri acknowledged and mentioned by former president of South Africa, Thabo Mbeki, era universities nyingi worldwide ezikikozesezza naddala ku research oba ku kunoonyereza kw'ebyobufuzi mu Africa wano. Ekitabo kino Professor kirina ewuwa Entebbe, era bw'oba oyagala kopi togaana kugenda Ntebbe osobole okukifuna. Abantu b'Entebbe bw'otuuka ekitubulwa awo n'obuuza ewa Professor Gukiina oba Gukiina Beach weeri, tewali atamanyiwo, ojja kufuna copies. Simanyi bungi bw'alinawo naye nkakasa ojja kufuna copies ezikumala. Mwali kyettanidde nnyo kubanga kirimu ebikulu bingi. Katugende ku bannaffe aba tukubidde ku masimu bwe babaayo. Osobola okubuuza ku Professor, osobola okumukulisa omwaka, osobola okumukulisa gy'abadde, ate era osobola okumubuuza ekibuuzo. Ebyo byajja okusobola okuddamu leero ajja biddamu, byatasobole ajja kudda nabyo olwokubiri olujja. Naye gezaako nnyo okubeera mu bufunze tuleme kulwawo wano ne programu ereme kuwanvuwa, kubanga twagala bangi basobole ogiraba nga bayambisa obudde obutonotono. Teweerabira oli ku UNN Truth Command Center. Katuwulirize munnaffe ono bw'aba aliko kyatu gambye.
Mukadde waffe kitaffe Muzeeyi Musoke Gukiina tukusanyukidde nnyo okulabika nti okomawo nate ku channel yaffe ya UNN okutusomesa okabanga kobadde otumazeeko era kwe tuli tugoberera. Tweyanziza nnyo okubeera nti ojja okutuwa history omunyuvu waati, era tojjanga okwo tukulindiridde ng'olwokubiri bwe batusuubizza. Webale nnyo, webalire ddala Omuzeeyi Mukulu Mulangira Ssebo, webale okutuleetera mukadde waffe once again.
Kale tweyanza nnyo munaffe, naawe webale okubeerako. Katuwulire ku munnaffe omulala. Kyagamba wano, muweereze obubaka bwammwe Professor nga situnnamuta. Osobola okuwa comment ku bisomeseddwa, osobola okubaako ky'obuuza, ojja kubeera nga oddibwamu bulungi nnyo nnyini ddala.
Prince webale kuweereza. Professor Peter Mutwebanze bane tweyanziza kalekisha kalungi kabadde kanyuvu nnyo
weewaawo
kabadde kanyuvu nnyo ebyo bali eri abalala bye beesamba abantu abategeeva okumpi nabo bwe batu tebabaagala bane tweyanziza Professor Peter kalekisha kalungi nojja ne bakusomesa novaawo ng'otegedde gye byatandikira ne gye byakoma
amazima. Okay, tweyanza nnyo tweyanzeege munnaffe mbagambye nti katandika butandisi entanda Professor gy'alina naffe omwaka guno anaagisubwa ali enenya yekka naye nga wana asunyeeko busunyi. Katusooke twongere okuwulira munnaffe ono. Okay. Hello. Kale munnaffe naawe weebale kubanga olaba naawe gukulike.
Tuso kwebaza kwange eri Professor Peter Musoke Gukiina olukutuwaayo akadde najja nga omukulu amanye ebyafaayo kugamba ye yali ategeera n'atuwa history oyo kuba bulijjo bw'otomanya gy'ova tomanya gy'olaga
kituufu
kiba kyamagezi nnyo omuntu okumanya ebyafaayo byo nga tonakwata ku lugendo lw'ogendako kubanga ebyafaayo byo biditamininga olugendo olw'ogenda okukwata naye buli lwoba tobimanyi osigala kwegamba oba toyambiddwa ate era ne gy'olaga oba tomanyiyo. So n'oba ensonga eyo neebaza nnyo Professor okuvaayo tufisizaawo akadde najja n'atusomesa mu kaseera kano wetwetaaga oyo okumanyawo we twawulira. Mugundi simanyi oba nze simutegedde bulungi oba ki naye okusinziira ku gundi nga bw'abadde agamba nti bwe twafuna obwetwaze twasigala tukyali anda n'abakyala ne gavumenti ya Bungereza. Ekintu ekyo nze ku lwange ndowooza nti tekyewalika kubanga kiringa omwana ng'ayiga okutambula. Gwe abaawo kuba okufuna obwetwaze obanga omuntu ayiga okwetengerera oba katugamba okutambula wateekeddwa okubaawo akukugira. Katugamba obadde omwana muto yakayiga okutambula wateekeddwa okubaawo amukugira okutambula aba asobola naye nga wabaawo amukugira aye tagenda ku sigiri tagenda ku ttaala takola ki. Nze gavumenti ya Bungereza siginenya nnyo kusigala bwe yali netatuta mulundi gumu kuba mu butuufu ebakututa mulundi gumu twandyesanze ate tuli wasofu kati tuli wasofu naye bakututa lumu netuganda kati mwerabirire buli omu akole kyakola kubanga oba basigala batukulembedde naye era ne tuba nga twava ku mulamwa twava ku leero ne tudda ebbali. Nze bennenya mpozi ab'ebyobufuzi abaaliwo mu kiseera ekyo era kansubire nabo tebaalina njawulo nga n'abaliwo olwaleero nti abasinga baali beenoonyeza byabwe. Nafuna omukisa okwoga
tukusubiddwa ssebo okutuseeko onoddamu oba n'otukubira naye ndowooza ekibuuzo kyo Professor bw'aba akifunye awo ajja kukituddamu oba ekyo kyennyini kwaba atandikira. Professor omukulu oyo
Kaakati omukulu oyo nsaba asome ku kwefuga kwa Amerika okuva ku Bungereza. Okusooka Bungereza mbategeezezza nti eddiini ne state are one. Ku lunaku lwa independence ya Amerika baagamba nti eddiini eggyibwe eby'obufuzi n'okutuuka ku ssaawa ya leero bwe kiri. Ku kwefuga kwa Bungereza kwa Amerika waaliwo Abaamerika abaali bagamba nti kasi twejje ku Britain kati naffe twetaaga kabaka owaffe. Era Abaamerika immediately baabasirisizaawo ne bagamba nti kitetwetaagira ddala mu Amerika bwe Bwakabaka. Bw'oba wadde ofollowinga campaign ezibaddewo okulonda kuno okubadde kugenda mu maaso. That was one of the biggest problem of Trump. Okulaga nti tayagala kubeera kabaka. Kaakati nabawadde kkooti ya President wa Amerika yagamba nti buli lw'okola ekintu nga topulaaninze, you are heading for disaster. You are planning for failure. Tetwasobola kwetegekera kwefuga okwandibadde kutuyambye okuba nti tetufeesinga bizibu bye njogeddeko. Kubanga okusooka, incidentally, zonna conferences ezaaliwo before independence, more than 80% of what was said by Baganda for Baganda. And their fear was nti ku development gye twalina mu Buganda, they were not so sure that development can be properly managed by leaders from other parts of Uganda. And they were right. That's why we are in the mess we are in today, and we have been in since 1966. Si kituufu nti omuntu bwe yeefuga aba mwana muto. Nnyinza okuwasa nga nina emyaka 3, naye tekitegeeza nti awasa nga alina emyaka 18 tasobola kubeera successful in the marriage. Akakwatagana ne Bungereza, sigamba nti Omungereza yasobya, kuba Omungereza served his interests. And what obligation did he have to serve our interests? Mu butuufu, some historians would say nti Omungereza planned us to be failures so that he could continue with the benefits he was getting from us out of our ignorance. For instance, lwaki ogrowinga tobacco mu West Nile ayonoona ettaka kw'olimira, akosa obulamu bwo, nga okutandika nga October 9 wandibadde ogamba abantu b'omu West Nile nti kati mulime ennyaanya n'ebinyoobwa, tugenda okukola oluguudo olujja okutambuza ebintu byammwe, ng'ate buli we tuyita tulina stores ez'ennyaanya n'ebinyoobwa n'emboga okuva mu West Nile okutuuka ku capital y'e Burundi oba Rwanda. But even today, enkusu zammwe zigamba mulime nnyo tobacco tufune dollars. Omungereza, by the way, it's the same today, and we make a big mistake. Abantu abo bali honest, bakugamba our interests. Okugaana Omuganda okuliidinga Uganda, senga Uganda kati eri ku level then Singapore. Naye bagamba no, Abaganda bano basobola obusuubuzi, bajja kutandika okutunda ebintu byabwe gye basinga okufuna sente nnyingi, and we shall lose out. Kubanga for us, we pay them peanuts for what the people in Uganda grow. Naye njagala ate buli omu akitegeere. Ndi mugezi nga mubuulire. Buli kintu kyonna omuntu ky'ayogera kiba kituyamba. Kuba omukulu ayogedde abadde ne questions mu mind ye, but those questions are also in the minds of other people. So collectively, we do better when we get his point of view, and then you get my response to it. And I thank him very much.
Kale, tweyanza katweyongereyo ne bannaffe.
Tweyanziza Professor ne Principal Kimbugwe ne tujja ntuwuliriza ku bintu bino nga tumaze okulaba ennaku ebadde tuli ku mitima ey'abali abalwanira omulambo balinga abagenda ogguli.
Ono nayongerako n'agamba nti Professor nga yalwayo, he is so interesting. The story from 1962 to 1966 is really interesting. Era buli munnayuganda yenna yali badde ali ku UNN essaawa eno. Abataliiko program esigalayo bajja kugisanga. Katuwulire oba katusome obubaka bw'omunnaffe ono mulala. Ono agambye, can Professor Gukiina kindly teach us more about the Moshi Conference and the good and flaws in the making of the Constituency Assembly, CA? Kale, ekibuuzo ekyo Professor kitutte era akiwandiise, ajja kuba ayongera okukituttaanyiza maaso eyo mu episode zaffe zijja. Ono agambye, Mulangira tusanyuse okukulabeera, weebale nnyo kukomyawo Professor Gukiina mu studios za UNN. We are honored to have you again at UNN, Professor Gukiina. We have missed your teaching for a long time. We are still us at UNN. We stand for federal and we strive to get it back. Sebo Professor Gukiina, webale kututangaza kucha independence ya Uganda. Ensobi zatandikirawo. Banji tutunulira Museveni, but Obote opened the way for destruction of our culture as Ugandans. The culture of all 16 nation states. We must look at the root cause to solve the problem. Tujja kusanyuka okukuuliza mu meeting za UFCC preliminaries. UNN for Federal Governance, thank you or thanks for the program. Mukama abakuume. Webale nnyo munnaffe, webalire ddala. Ono agambye, question, if by 1962 Buganda was independent and assumed some control over Uganda, kakati, when was this dissolved? When was this dissolved, all legally dropped, and then was integrated into Uganda? Eteka Livaona Teka should have been dissolved legally. Otherwise, Buganda should continue to be an entity of its own. Professor Musoke tudemuko abo oke katugatireko ddala nono. Professor, thank you for the program and gracing us with your presence on UNN Truth Command Center. As for me, my mind is stuck at Uganda getting independence, yet they claim we were a protectorate. That buffers me, or buffers my mind. At an opportune moment, please clarify. Ugandans, thank you, UNN. Ugandans surely need a mindset reset or change. These programs are very vital. Okay, tusoke tuwulire abo oba Professor oddemu abo.
Kaakati subjects ze baleese zijja kubeera covered mu episodes eziddirira, tezeetaaga quick answers. The answer in a context. Ate ng'ekyo kitwala obudde and the preparation. Kubanga okugeza bw'oyogera ku CA nina ne video gye njagala okubalaga. Incidentally, abatawaanyiza program yo they are saboteurs and they are enemies of Uganda. Kuba nagitandise okubayambako okukitegeera nti bye mbagambye ekiro kya leero nja bituusa ku mukulu Okahinda Otafiire, who is really the political big man, and also to Kraije, who is also really a big man in our armed forces. Omanyi buli lwenkola ebintu bino, it's always interesting. Kuba ng'okulonda kuli okwagga okwalimu amama Mbabazi, nagenda ewa mama Mbabazi ewuwe emmaka ge ne mutegeeza kye nali ndowooza ng'alangiridde okuvuganya Museveni, ne mutwalira ne documents zange. Kati ewa mama Mbabazi apparently waliyo intelligence officers baagenda okutuusa information mu State House Entebbe nga document zonna ze mpadde Mbabazi ne bye mugambye mbiweereza State House Entebbe. Kubanga it's madness for anybody to stop what I've said tonight to be heard by Ugandans. Either that somebody is a thief, ng'alowooza nti okuzibula bannayuganda amaaso kijja kukendeeza emikisa gye egy'okulootinga Ugandan resources. Kubanga after all, who is he that is more concerned about what I say than the president of Uganda or the armed forces? Incidentally, as we go forward, you are going to find out that there should be no more wars in Uganda or fighting for power, because wherever there is a fight, the biggest losers would be those people now in the government. Kubanga, believe me, I quoted Idi Amin not by accident. Bw'otunuulira okulwanira omufunga bwe wakulabye, bw'otunuulira ebizibu bye tulina n'abasuubuzi mu Kampala, ku bizibu bya Uganda, the more you stay in power, the more unpopular you become. Especially when you are not versed in our history, especially when you have a weakness in way of appreciating the identities of the various communities in Uganda. So more is going to come in the proper context, and hopefully people should be connecting to UNN in Uganda to disperse what is going on over there, so that Ugandans here and abroad are better informed, so that we can make better informed decisions about our future for a better Uganda.
Thank you very much, Professor. Genda kunsaasira nkuweeyo omuyekka tusobole okuva wano. Ebibuuzo byammwe bannaffe byonna babitutte era mugenda kubiwulira nga omukulu akomyewo mu studios.
Tweyaziza nnyo okulaba ku Professor Gukiina, tukusanyukidde ddala era twesunga okwongera okuyiga. Nze nsiimye nnyo oku-emphasizing ekintu kya identity. Kubanga entalo tuzirwana naye oluusi tukibuusa amaaso. Ti okwetegeera mu identity yaffe nga nze kati omukazi Omuganda n'ekyenyumirizaamu kye kindeetera ate okuba nga nsobola okusiima neighbor wange. Sebo tweyanzizza nnyo, tweyanzeege kubanga tubadde tukiyiga nnyo ku UNN kya identity nkulu. Naye naawe tukwebaza nti okisimbyeko essira. Era tusanyuse okukulaba nate era twesunga okwongera okuyiga. Mukama akutukuumire, nawe Mulangira tukweyanzizza nnyo effort y'okutuleetera Professor Gukiina. Mukama abakuume.
Kale, tweyanza nnyo naawe okubeerako era mwenna tubeebaza okubanga mubaddeko okuva gye twatandikidde paka gye tukomye. Professor, mu bigambo ebitonotono nsaba osibule abadde batuwuliriza era abatulaba okuva gye twatandikidde.
Bannayuganda bannange mwebale nnyo okumpa omukisa okwogerako gye muli. Ate bannayuganda bannange bye twogera bikwata ku buli munnayuganda era tulina obisharinga na buli munnayuganda. Problem de tulina, together we shall find solutions. We are going to cut the losses and we are going to move this Uganda of ours forward to a civilized society for the benefit of every human being in Uganda. Thank you very much.
Tweyanza nnyo, tweyanzeege mwenna ababaddeko nja kubeebaza era nembawa kasaluti ako tugenda kuddingana olunaku olw'enkya ate ne Jacob Chu ekitundu kijja kuba kya 322. Akume atakumira mpeera. Nze Kimbugwe, bye bye for now.
Thank you.
Teribudde gatta dots. Necesito Tokekeza bongo Ununulepeyo Tokekeza bongo Ununulepeyo Jimbuyege Olaba jena kaba Bataka Uganda gunja wekitaso muto Munasi chekyonsa oweebwa akakadde ka siringi buli mwezi kwenyumiriza munyo Federo mu Buganda Tokekeza bongo Ununulepeyo Tokekeza bongo Ununulepeyo
We shall crush those enemies.
Jaja figurudene yabakumira kyoto batulaga muto kana kakutya tiweyambulira mutonzi wo kulowooza kuvumula kyotya ebiwuliddwa ebikopebwa obugwenyufu yennuno tokekereza bongo bu onunulebbeyo tokekereza bongo bu onunulebbeyo obwenje fertilizer busa